Hi everyone, and welcome to our Enghouse webinar today, Ask Our Experts, where we'll give all the attendees a chance to ask their questions about integrating a contact centre with Microsoft Teams. My name's Barbara Stewart, I'm on the marketing team at Enghouse, and thank you for coming. First of all, I'd like to introduce our panel for today, three globally respected Enghouse experts. Pete Fedarb has worked in both New Zealand and the UK for Enghouse and is now part of our APAC team. Dave McDowell joins us at a horrible time of night from the UK. Thank you, Dave. And Dave is part of the UK and Europe team and has kindly agreed to add his expertise to this panel. So we have over 45 years of communications experience with these two today. We're especially pleased to ask them to share their deep knowledge of Microsoft Contact Centre integration with us. Lastly, I'm very happy to introduce Anna Stokes, who will moderate our audience questions today and add her own significant expertise and strategic vision to this panel. Anna has been in this industry for 23 years, from the cradle, Anna, and we are very proud that she has been recognised by AusContact's Contact Centre magazine as one of the top 100 influencers in the contact centre industry in the Asia Pacific region in 2023. Before we move on to the main event, we'd like to introduce Enghouse to those who don't know us, and of course a recap if you do. Our name comes from Engineering House, and our Customer Experience Suite is the industry's most comprehensive offering today. This means that Enghouse can offer contact centres in the cloud, on premises, or as hybrid deployments. And all these options allow organisations to find the best fit for their contact centre solution needs. Enghouse has been a close partner with Microsoft in the development since Microsoft OCS was released in 2008. We've developed integration with every flavour of Microsoft UC, including Lync, Skype for Business, and now, of course, Teams, showcasing our solution on stage with Microsoft at their Inspire and Ignite events in the past. Microsoft's API for Contact Centre allows their customers to access the best of all worlds in a Teams integrated customer experience solution. From Teams functions and Dynamics CRM on the one side to specialist contact centre capability such as intelligent omnichannel agent delivery and reporting on the other. Email, chat, SMS, video and voice can be distributed, managed, captured and securely stored to provide performance and activity insights to managers. As we noted in our last webinar, it's now 6 years since Microsoft released Teams in March 2017. The pandemic accelerated its recognition and adoption, and this year Teams surpassed 280 million monthly active users. Microsoft continues to deliver new features for Teams, and in the contact centre industry, we talk to new professionals every week looking to migrate their contact centres to Teams. So today we'll take your questions on running an integrated contact centre on the Microsoft Teams platform, and I shall now hand you over to Pete Fedarb. Thank you, Pete.
So today what we're going to be looking at is the submitted questions. Obviously, when the invites went out to the webinar, we did ask whether there was any questions you wanted us to particularly to address, and then we're going to move into a section there where we'll take questions from the chat as well. So feel free to add those questions into the chat. We will have a section at the end where we'll start reviewing them, or anything that comes up pertinent to the subject that we're talking about. Bob will interrupt me as we move through and just pose that question in. So feel free to use the chat if you'd like to ask a question today, then we'll happily do that. We'll move on to some of the questions we've already been asked. One of the sort of most common questions in talking to customers on a daily basis around the Teams architecture is, what do I do if something fails? And quite a lot of the time I do sort of pose the question back to customers to say, with your traditional PBX that you have at the moment, what would you do if that was to fail at that point in time? And that does obviously raise some eyebrows internally within the business. They don't have a solution for that, but they're very much conscious that Teams is a global platform there. There has been some posted downtime, and therefore there is a genuine concern about how would I run my business if there was a failure. So within the sort of environment, obviously from the contact center perspective, we can provide a primary and a secondary server. And most customers will look to obviously produce a primary and a secondary SBC there, so that you can have two connections, the green line here from the PSTN to your SBC to bring your lines in, and then a secondary route to an SBC. And these might be in sort of active standby, or they might be in active mode where they could sort of round robin calls between them. What we would generally do is, when we're integrating in a SIP methodology, is to make a connection to the primary SBC. You could have a secondary route coming in from the other SBC, depending on which lines would be green and which ones would be yellow for the alternatives, depend on whether these are active or passive at that point in time. But realistically, what we're trying to do is reduce a single point of failure, having two contact center servers, two SBCs. So a failure of any one of these should still mean the service continues. And obviously, if we have a failure of two items, if this is in a primary sort of center or within sort of an Azure infrastructure that fails, then obviously the secondary infrastructure can take over at that point in time. However, what will happen if we lost both contact centers, or in the time it takes the contact centers to swap over in those couple of minutes where the service resumes? We also have another failover concept to use the Teams call groups within there. So if the SBCs can send the calls to the primary server and then try the secondary server, if both of those responses fail, SBC can also have a tertiary route in there to say, I want to go to a Teams call group. And for those that don't know what a Teams call group is, we're talking in old language, a basic hunt group. But the hunt groups there can have full IVR call flows, they can have longest waiting groups, they can do multiple groups, so bringing a secondary group in after 30 seconds, for example. They're quite powerful in the call routing there. What you'd actually lose at that point in time is just some statistical information. But obviously, if your primary and secondary servers are up, this is where you're going to get all your reporting data. Really, if you're into that tertiary one, you're looking at having as a minimum calls coming into the business and still being able to handle those customer interactions. So realistically, that's how we would typically deploy. A lot of the more of the concerns that we do have from customers is what happens if I lose this environment. And Microsoft does have some offerings within this environment, and we'll take you through those on the next slides here, which is that you can go for what they call multi-regional support. So what you can actually do within your teams, you pay extra from Microsoft for this, is you can have your primary tenancy, but you can also order a secondary tenancy. And one of those could be, let's say, in Auckland and Wellington, or you could do sort of Sydney and Victoria, for example. You can have those different regions to say, if Teams is failed in that one particular region, your clients will connect to a secondary region. So the direct routing from an SBC would just be set up to talk to both of those infrastructures. Obviously, your clients would be, when you're programming them, they will literally be told to connect to this instance, if not connect to that instance. And that gives you a certain level of protection. However, when I say a certain level of protection, that's where we have to understand how sort of Teams is built. And this is why I've put these boxes down here in the right-hand corner. Teams isn't really just reliant on Teams. Very first, there's the phone system elements to Teams. And this sort of layer is referred to as phone system. You're quite used to, if you're a Skype user, adding a phone system user to make them have an outside line and a DDI that's there. But realistically, it's the telephony controls within Teams. Then have the actual Teams layer, which is more of the collaboration, the client connectivity that's there. So you could have an independent connectivity issue within the phone system and going to another region, likelihood that would succeed. Same again at the Teams layer. If there was a problem with registration here, the likelihood is that it would be solved by going to another region. But there are other Microsoft elements, part of the Microsoft stack as people refer to it, that are more going to be global, that they would relate to both of these regions. For example, to AD. So when you're doing the logon from a Teams client, it's really checking that against your Azure AD there. Therefore, if there was a problem with Azure AD, that possibly could affect both regions, and you may have the challenge within some regions. So again, there's a level of resilience within there, but it doesn't protect you from everything that could possibly go wrong. And there are instances where we've seen sort of Azure AD being a problem, where that's also caused a Teams outage, but also, for example, an Office 365 outage for email, because they're both dependent on that authorization of a user coming from Azure AD. Next type of scenario that you can get is really emerging, not necessarily directly from Microsoft, but it's supported by Microsoft, is actually the SBC providers are producing devices they refer to as SBAs, which are known as survivable branch appliances. Anybody that was familiar with the Skype for Business world, if you come from that world, these did exist in Skype for Business, but they're emerging now in Teams. And basically, the SBA is almost like a SBC that's capable of routing calls, but it has an additional function. And that's when your Teams clients can't register to the Teams cloud, Teams clients can actually register to this private device that acts a little bit like Teams. It doesn't have all of the full functionality of Teams. It will have the ability to do DDI calls, outbound calls, normal internal calls between users that are there, but it won't support things like the Teams call groups. So hug groups aren't supported within there. You're going to lose a lot of those collaboration and IM capabilities that are there. And the device is really there to keep the Teams voice going, keeping phone calls coming in and out of the business to communicate. So that sounds like a very good solution in the background to add in. And obviously with the SIP integration that we use on the contact center platform, we're phoning the agent's DDI. So in those circumstances, if we phone an invite to the agent's DDI for the SBC, if it can't go via direct routing to Teams because Teams is down, SBC can be programmed to send it to SBA, and that user should be registered to the SBA. So it will still keep those calls coming into those users as well. So it does provide you a level of comfort to know that the integration would still work within that scenario. However, the complexities that we might find is a lot of people are using the direct routing link here, not doing it by an on-premise SBC now. They're doing it more in the carrier's actual own network. So if you're with, for example, one of their sort of tier one carriers, they'll normally do the direct routing within the data center, so there's no devices left on site. Those SBCs that they're using within the data center, because that's really what they're using behind the scenes, are big, whacking great big multi-tenant SBCs. So it's unlikely that those SBCs are going to be an SBA in their own right. They're there for a particular function to handle thousands of customers and calls going through them. So if you're requesting an SBA, that will probably be something that will be added to your solution within that area as a standalone sort of add for you. Therefore, if you've got a large infrastructure with lots of different sites around the globe, you might have multiple devices in different data centers. It would be just realistically making sure that all of the routing between the SBCs is going to work if there's a failure within Teams. So this SBC would have to contact a multitude of SBAs, potentially if you have a large estate spread over sort of, global or regional areas. So the complexities of that, it does look very simple on the diagram. For large customers, it may take a little bit of thinking about of how they connect those together. It's all routing within there, and any of the providers that are looking into that should be able to do that. It is one of those that does look very simple for a single site. Multiple sites may have a few more complexities to them, but the idea is a independent device, not a Microsoft device, but a Microsoft approved device that you can register Teams clients for basic Teams calling, DDI, and internal calling only. So that is all great, but quite a lot of people will ask what happens if something more catastrophic fails. Let's say I have a failure at the PSTN, it's not the SBCs on site, it may be something at sort of the trunks coming into the building, maybe there's a connectivity, someone's cut through fibers, for example, and realistically the only thing left working out the solution is the PSTN level. And If all of these other options are a bit more complex and you don't really want that, you just want something that's all overarching, some of the options that you can do are carrier groups. So most of the T1 carriers will offer you things like 800 numbers that can be redirected. Most of them also offer you the equivalent of a hunt group that's built in the carrier cloud that's able to deliver it through to things like home phone users, mobile phone users, and you can create your own hunt group in the cloud. And therefore, this gives you overarching protection. You usually pay a little bit extra for the service, but basically, if there is a failure, you can resort to another way of working. Have had a few customers where they take a look into this and they say, actually, it's not for us. Our service is a bit more critical. We need to go for something more sort of contact center specific. We have a couple of customers that have opted for our Enghouse Ask platform. And for those that may not know, the CCAS platform, it's a multi-tenant cloud platform based out of the Azure infrastructure in Australia. And it's a contact center in its own right. It can be connected into Teams, but it also can do delivery via a web client. So realistically, bringing the voice to you via a browser. So it can work completely independent of Teams. So we have had customers that might want to fall back and have a PR platform ready to go as an entire contact center there. So we can offer multiple solutions from Enghouse, and this is really about the discussions that we have customers transitioning to Teams. What is the best fit for you? What level of resiliency would you like? And are you thinking about the right things for the protection layers within your teams? And if you are, how that will affect out the routing from our solution, and just making sure that we can tick it all off. So that's really the conversations that I have with customers on a day-to-day basis. So I'm going to move through to a slightly different subject now. It's a use case question that we had for a customer, but I'm going to hand it across to Dave McDowell just to take this one over. So can I hand that over to you, Dave?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Pete. Yeah, so the question was asked here about whether an agent who is on a call in the contact center could be alerted to a priority call coming in on another queue. So the scenario given here was where an organization takes emergency calls or calls from police, ambulance service, etc., and they want to be notified very prominently and audibly that there's a priority call waiting. Now, actually, this is very similar to a scenario I've done recently with a couple of customers who have social alarm centers where they handle more standard contact center calls, but also social alarms at the same time. Now, we've always been able to do this. We can do it across all of the different PBX platforms, and that's still with us in Teams, and it's by using the Q alerts functionality. So each queue alert that you can set up, you can set it on different thresholds. So the one in this instance would be looking at doing that by setting an alert based on the number of calls in queue. So that in your priority or emergency queues, as soon as you have any calls queuing whatsoever, they're configured to set alerts on the agent desktop. And this can also be an audible alert, and you can choose what those audible alerts are. You could have different ones for different queues, etc. So they will manifest as a pop-up on the screen, as you'll see in the bottom right of the screenshots there, but also can be triggering, as I say, an audible alert along with that. And what the agent can do at that point is to actually abandon or get rid of the call they're on to say, I need to take this emergency call. And from the actual pop-up alert that comes on the desktop, they can directly request the call as well. They don't actually have to go and find it, etc. It's there on the alert, or they can click on the show alerts button, which will take them to the touchpoint view of that queue and that alert that's being actioned at the moment. So it works really well. As I say, we can do any of the PBX environments, including Teams, but it's about signaling that there's something important that should override the activity the agent is currently engaged in. Okay, that was it on that one, Pete. Back to you.
Thank you for that, Dave. So moving through to one of the next common questions that we got from the base was about the integration options for Teams and how they differed. We did cover this quite a lot in the previous sessions there, so I won't do it to death. But for anyone that hasn't seen the sort of first couple of sessions that we were webinars that we ran, there are some recorded videos. The links will be coming out that will cover this in a little bit more depth. But realistically, we're looking at the 3 different methods of integration. The first being SIP integration is the most common that's been used. It's the one that very firstly evolved with Microsoft, who brought a SIP trunk onto it, and then we would conference the calls up. Really, the only supports a direct routing there, so you have to sort of bring your own carrier to Microsoft at that point in time. The challenge is it doesn't support the Microsoft call plan, so if you want those Microsoft numbers, that integration model isn't the one for you. But most customers are actually working with other carriers, but we do have the occasional carrier that is, or customer that is planning to go to Microsoft as their carrier. It's just being aware that that level of integration is external to Microsoft, and this is internal to Microsoft, so bringing those calls out of the cloud can be problematic. We then have the Microsoft Calling API, and the difference with this is basically contact center starts to control the calls within the it uses the Microsoft conference bridges. So we basically create a conference, we then play announcements and invite the agents into a Microsoft conference, very similar to all the Teams meetings that we've been joining for the last couple of years through lockdown. We would basically be the conferencing leader and inviting the parties in and out of that. Because that is native to doing that, you can use both sort of third-party numbers, so use the direct routing method, and also the Microsoft call plans as well. So this is the one for you if you want to take a look at the Microsoft call plans, this method of integration. It's more recent. We've had this into market for about the last 9 months. There are a few feature gaps that are within there, though, that we did cover off on other sessions. Things like impersonating the user when you do a transfer. So if you transfer to somebody in the back office, it won't show the customer number. But we did go into quite a lot of detail on previous sessions. So if you're interested in the differences, have a look at those other videos as well when we send those links across. So this is the emerging one. Very last one is the Microsoft Calling API. So the Calling API is the ability to use the APIs to control the conferences within Teams. We're adding a little bit extra onto that, which is the ACS API. The ACS API is where we take that phone system element of Microsoft and we actually build that into the Touchpoint client, so that the Touchpoint client becomes a Teams endpoint, no different than you running Teams on your mobile phone. It becomes another Teams endpoint from your laptop. Your laptop's one endpoint, your mobile phone's another, and your Touchpoint client will become a Teams endpoint in its own right. Now that does actually mean that we'll be able to get over some of the hurdles that are in there. That's really why this development is rolling in and expanding further, just because we found a few challenges within here with the API set. It wasn't one all encompassing, and we found that the client side APIs are something we're going to be help us use controls in there as well. It's also going to enable us to do a lot easier around things like video promotion, screen sharing, and those sorts of things as well. So this is something we're currently working on in development. We've got timeline around about sort of towards the end of the year, sort of the last quarter of the year, to look to get the first releases of that into the market that's there. And obviously we'll be running some additional webinars once it's closer to the time and we finalize some of that development to show the progress around that one. And we should be looking to take that even further. The first sort of main focus of that is to make the Touchpoint an endpoint, trying to solve some of those simple transfer issues that we found in the existing API set. And then obviously we'll be expanding on that to start handling things like media, screen promotion, and those. But I'd expect the first release to start solving some of those problems. So if you're looking at this and the transfer to the back office is a little bit of a step too far for you, this is sort of the timeline maybe to step if you're currently at SIP or considering moving to the Calling API, possibly looking at this stage is the right time for you. So let's take a look at what other contact center functions can work with Teams. And realistically, this is because we've had a lot of questions around Teams and they've all been centered around voice. However, there's a lot of other feature sets that we found people want to use within the contact center remit. So I'm just going to get Dave to take you through these ones, and Dave will give you a run through. Just give me a chance to breathe. Bear me a second and I'll get to the next slide. Over to you, Dave.
Right, thanks. Okay, so the first and probably one of the most important is around call recording and quality management. So our quality management suite, which is tightly integrated into Communication Center, is part of the overall suite and carries on working and expanding within the Teams environment. So QMS can, as a audio capture, can be capturing audio in a number of different ways. We can be doing it directly from the CC server in the Teams SIP environment. We can be doing SIP-rec from the session border controller, but we also have the Teams native integration. So using the Graph API, we're a compliance recording bot, and we get invited into Teams calls. So we can cover the whole gamut of recording requirements in the Teams environment, from just the contact center right through to back office and internal conversations within Teams itself using the native recording. The other thing to mention though on this is that the recording isn't just call recording, it's omni-channel interaction recording. So all of the interactions that go through the contact center can be recorded on the platform as well as part of the overall solution. So things like the emails and web chats, social media interactions, etc. And then that all moves into the quality space where we are doing agent scorecarding and workflows around agent scorecarding and agent evaluation. This is a big area of development for us around analytics, call analytics, transcription of voice recordings. We've got coming up shortly translation of recordings, as well as transcription. So it's one of the sort of real growth areas in what we do, and the whole Teams native piece is just a standard part of that. If we move on to the next one, Pete. The other one is, we carry through from all of our previous iterations of Communication Center is CRM integration and ticketing system integration, etc. All of the standard plugins that we've had traditionally work in the Teams environment on contact center calls. Now, one slight difference is we were able to do screen popping on more direct calls that weren't queued through the contact center previously. That's a little bit limited currently on Teams environment, but any contact center queued call coming through Communication Center, we can do those dynamic CRM screen pops, Salesforce screen pops, and click to dials as we did in the past, things like SAP ServiceNow, and we can still use things like our web browser plugin to generate dynamic URLs based on call information that we've captured, build URLs and execute them when the application or when the call reaches the agent and is triggered either from our thick client or from the newer web client. That isn't a major change at all from previous environments. So we'll move on, Pete. In terms of the actual omni-channel capabilities, we get caught up, as Pete already said, a lot of talking about Teams and voice, but there are all the other channels that we always supported and we still do support on the platform in Teams. So whether that be inbound and outbound SMS, is it web chat from your customer website, outbound dialing where we're taking in campaigns of data, dial lists, etc., that we want to call people in, call out to people on, task activity queuing, so workflows, events that are generated maybe from a CRM system or a workflow engine, and activities we need to place in queue and deliver to the agents. With web chat, it might be chatbot escalation, so putting bots and self-service on the front of the queue and then escalating into the live queues, along with things like social channels, WhatsApp, Facebook, etc., all as channels into the contact center. So it's not just about Teams, it's also about those other omni-channel interactions that we still support in the Teams environment. And one of the that I just mentioned very quickly there, but is bots and virtual assistants and self-service. So a lot of what we're doing now is looking at how we offer those self-service channels on the on those other routes into the contact center. So obviously in web chat, that might be fronting it with a virtual assistant, but that might also be on the virtual channel, on the social channels as well, where we can be fronting all text-based interactions, i.e. web chat, social channels, and SMS, for example, with a virtual assistant. Trying to do self-service, it might be actual interaction deflection from the contact center, or just extending your office hours, being able to give advice, give service to your customers when you don't have live agents in the contact center. But always remembering that we can then escalate those interactions to a live agent where appropriate, and pass the transcript of that transaction through to the agent so they can understand what the virtual assistant's been discussing with the caller, with the customer, before that escalated into the contact center. And as we move forward in the Microsoft journey, more and more of this is utilizing the resources and the capabilities of Azure and the cognitive services within the Azure platform. Another area of interest that isn't so much just the contact center piece, but we're able to bring to bear as well, is around call logging and auditing. So one of the great things about Communication Center in any PBX or UC environment is we give you very rich real-time and historic statistics around the call queues, the interaction queues, the agent availability, etc. But when you go to Teams as an organization, you also need that level of visibility on the back office that you might have been used to on your legacy environment, legacy PBX environment. And so we have a product called Proteus, which is a call logger, which works across all UC and PBX environments, but also supports Teams, allowing you to extract CDR data from Teams and also things like call quality data from Teams, and puts a whole reporting layer over that to be able to look at what's happening in that back office world in terms of number of inbound calls that you have, the number of outbound, how many are getting answered or not answered, how many are getting bounced around your organization. Because we give you that on the communication center, but you won't necessarily have that in Teams itself. It's not as transparent. So a product like Proteus gives you that ability on the Teams platform to have a much deeper dive into what's happening on your call handling across the whole business, not just the contact center. And then I think the last one, oh, you skipped it, yeah, is one of the areas for development for us as well is actually the Teams instant messaging and video support. So people who may have come from the Skype for Business world, in the Skype for Business world, we were able to queue Skype IMs into contact center queues in a very similar way to we do with voice calls, and you were able to do the escalation to voice and video on that. Now currently, with the state we are with the Microsoft APIs, we can't do that on Teams IMs. We can queue Teams IMs into Communication Center. So where we have internal support desks and help desks, this is the usual use case on this one, we can support that functionality. But what we're looking for from the ACS integration and the further development that's coming is that ability to take those IMs in a more native way and do the video and screen sharing type escalations on those interactions that came on, that come in. So currently we have that base IM capability, but not the escalation capabilities around that. But they are things, as I say, and that Pete mentioned before, that we'll be developing with the ACS integration. So there are just a few of the things that we can do as well in the Teams environment. You'll see from there's pretty much the same range of features, functionality, and add-ons that we have elsewhere. So it's fully featured within the Teams environment. So I think at this point we move on to the next slide, which is opening it up to any questions that are coming in during the session today.
Yep, so thanks for that, Dave. And I believe we're handing over to Anna. Anna, any questions that have come up that you want to pose to us today?
We do have one. This one's for you, Pete. So having QMS within the Teams for recording, does it impact the performance? And how does it upload the recording, simultaneously or after the call?
So within the QMS environment, basically there are a few different ways of tackling the voice, as Dave did, but the most common one and the most overarching one is to use the Teams native APIs. And basically the way that our bot really goes and talks to the Teams environment there, what we can do is it can use two different methods, one to stream it live, and it can do another method to say, give me a copy once it's been completed. Now, we went for the stream it while it's live message because there's some things that we want to do with things like inline translation, for example. It shouldn't affect the load that's on there. The way that the recordings are fed across into your QMS system should all be fine. We have had a couple of customers that have asked for the compliance messaging to be turned on or to be turned off. Some people want that you're being recorded happening on the Teams client, so their agents know that they're being recorded. Others want that to be turned off, so we will have a toggle option for that. But it shouldn't impact the recording in any way or the performance of the call in any way if we're streaming the recording out of the Azure tenancy. If we're doing that from the CC server, we have slightly different specs. If you're monitoring the calls from the CC server and we're passing them from the CC to the QMS, we do have slightly different specs there where we up the performance slightly of the box to cater for that extra load. So when we have that calls coming in and out of there, we're also passing one leg of that through to the QMS server. So that extra load, if we're doing that on the EICC server, we just have a slightly different column of specifications for the servers to handle that extra load.
Thanks, Pete. That looks to be like our only question in the bucket at the moment. Anything else out that you'd like to know from the attendees today?
I think it looks as if we've got someone just entering a question now. Not quite sure what they said. Yep, here we go.
Here we go. Okay, so can we manage the IVR scripting by ourselves, or will Enghouse be managing that for us?
So if we're talking, when people talk about IVRs, they can be two different things. One could be what we would refer to more as an auto attendant, where you build a menu for press 1 for this, press 2 for that. The expectation is around about 90 to 95% of our customers build their own, maintain their own, change their recordings. We would handle that within training. So at that point in time, it's all click and play GUIs, and we can certainly do a demonstration to anyone in particular that wants to have a look at that within the system. So the sort of auto attendants, it could be multi-layer where you sort of press an option, you get another set of options. They can all be done by customers, and by customers I don't necessarily mean IT staff within the business. A lot of our customers, it's actually the contact center managers are making their own changes to the options, and they're also making sort of uploading greetings and determining what's being played out to the public. So it's very simple to do. We would usually recommend with most deployments 1 day's administration training, and that gets you to do all of your day-to-day changes to manage your system within the contact center. Obviously, we can offer services and we do sort of MacPack type changes where we can offer out sort of, management packages around that. But the normal expectations is that we would train you to do it. The other side, when you mention IVR, is when it gets a little bit more complex, where you're doing things like interaction with other databases. So, if you think of something like telephone banking is a classic IVR that everybody has used, where you're reading back account balances and those sorts of things. They're a little bit more intensive. They do require a certain skill set from your business to have somebody that understands how to write code, because it's very much bespoke written, if you like, to your solution. We do have customers that require us to maintain those just because they don't have the skill sets. But we also have a lot of customers where we've done the first initial development, because that's the weight of building it from the first place, but then taught them to maintain it from there. And we would do a handover as part of that project to teach them how to make the changes, understand the scriptings and the type of changes that they might to do, and provide documentation as well. So with that IVR, you've got the two different levels. The simple menu AAs would expect, the expectation is that could be done by your contact center sort of users, if you like. But true IVR, where you're doing things like telephone banking and those type of readback IVRs, if you have the skill sets, yes, you could do, but we would probably sort of talk to those before we commence the project to make sure it's the right type of skill sets. But normally we're doing that first initial design. Very rarely do customers just build it straight from the ground up. We take that heavy lifting away in the first place.
Thank you, Pete. So the next one's an interesting one. We have others found sound quality to be slightly not so crisp as in Skype? This one is an interesting one. When you move to Teams, we have had some feedback from customers that have said that their Teams environments are crisper than the contact center environments. And I think that's slightly to be expected because the calls in our classic Teams SIP environment is tromboning through an SBC, and it has several pathways that it takes. So we have had that feedback from customers that it's ever so slightly not so crisp when you're using a SIP platform with Teams. When you move to native, that goes away because the call is maintained in the cloud, so that tromboning of the call across the platform is removed. So the crispness remains, but it is a very, very slight quality difference. I'm going to, I guess, clarify that that's the difference between a Teams standard call and a Teams contact center call using SIP. The difference between Skype and Teams, I haven't had any feedback in the difference there of quality. Pete, Dave, have you got any feedback in the difference between Skype and Teams?
It's not necessarily a difference of Skype and Teams, Anna. We have found that where people are doing direct routing, that there may be some of the different ways the calls are transversing, that there's a tendency to change codecs sometimes by some of the people that are choosing the own codecs that they want to do. And basically a codec is how the voice gets sampled. And the more times you change the sampling rate, the worse the call's going to sound, or the more different it will sound to the originating sound. So it's a little bit like, if anyone remembers sort of recording mixtapes back in the day, if you gave it to your friend and you copied it and copied it and copied it, it would degrade the voice. And the more that you change codecs on the call flow as it moves through these different points, then that can really impact how that quality actually is. So if you are experiencing those issues, it's possibly worth having a look at all of your different trunk connectivity points and saying, do I need to change the codec at that point? So if you try and keep it the same like G711 all the way through, then you're going to get a lot better representation of what was actually first sampled, rather than getting it resampled multiple times before the agent hears it. And that's somewhere where we have found customers experiencing a difference in the sound quality is really because they were changing codecs 2 or 3 times on the call, and therefore that does have a little bit of effect on the quality of sound.
Thanks, Pete. Dave, anything you want to add there?
No, I think Pete said it all there.
Beautiful. Okay, heading back to talking about our alerting options prior, can you comment further around indicating there is an emergency call waiting other than screen pops or alarms? The example would be, we have an agent has left the room in the small hours of the night and is on a call, and an emergency call comes in. Can a side tone or similar be sent to their wireless headset?
Because the wireless headset is the media device for their computer, the actual audio alarm that Dave was talking about during his presentation, that would actually play on the headset. So as long as your agent is still within sort of Bluetooth or wireless connectivity to there, we're talking about playing a multimedia sound, no different than your email pinging. You could still hear that on there if Outlook had an audible alarm set up for an email arriving. So the same concept would be there for walk away devices that there. You would still get the alarm in your headset because it is a media sound that we're actually playing with that alert.
Perfect. Does Microsoft Teams integration contact centers support desk phones?
Yes, there are a range of desk phones that you can look for. The best place to look for that is if you go into Google and look for Microsoft Teams supported devices. It will take you to a Microsoft website. I'll see if Bob might be able to include that on the email that we send out for the for this webinar, to include the link to that website for you, just to help you navigate around. But what you'll find on there are approved devices, things like headsets, desk phones, meeting room phones there, that have all been approved by Microsoft. So those vendors have had the stamp, they've gone through the testing that's there, and that should give you some assurance of quality of them. The one thing that I will note, just to speed up any issues with them, when those devices come to your doorstep, the first thing you should do is update the drivers on those devices. When those devices come and they're shipped to you, they're possibly might have a year or 2 years old drivers on them, so you would update the firmware on there to make sure you've got the latest fixes that are there. Quite a lot, even in the Skype days and in Teams days, people having sort of Bluetooth headsets or hard phones that are there, when they found interrupt quality or call quality issues, quite a lot of the time it turned out to be the drivers of those devices. So when you get those third-party devices, do take the time to make sure you update to the latest, as we have seen it cause problems elsewhere.
Great tip and trick there, Pete. Thank you. Are there dashboards, wallboards available in Microsoft Teams integration setup?
Yes, we have with the snapshot client, which is a web-based wallboard. Every client in the touchpoint client that we use does give everybody a wallboard on their own desk for the agents there. Mainly because a lot of people are remote working and you don't really want to look at that big TV screen. But if you do want a dashboard, we do support a snapshot, which is a web-based wallboard that can be run on big TVs, or you could only have a display on a manager that doesn't necessarily need the touchpoint client there. That's one way of getting statistics. We have other customers that have chosen to get our custom reporting add-on that gives you a copy of your reporting database, and they've built their own sort of Power BI dashboards, and they're using the contact center reporting as another option that is popular with customers as well.
Perfect. That is all the questions we've got that have come through so far. Any last stragglers that would like to come through?
I think we're good, Anna. Thank you very much. Thank you, Pete. Thank you, Dave. If you could just flick over, Pete, to the last slide. Thank you. Great. So if anybody would like to get in touch with us, those are the contact details there, and our website, a video, and we will put some links onto the follow-up email that goes out. And thank you, Pete, Dave, Anna, for your participation today, and thank you everybody for attending. We'll look forward to seeing you at the next one, and please do fill out the exit survey as you go. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks for your time all.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.